Of two people who could tell some stories over 50 years plus in trucking media, trucking. I thought this was a grand opportunity and we couldn't miss out on it.
Welcome to Landline Media. I'm Scott Thompson, joined by Landline Magazine's Jamie Jones.
It's good times, good times. We were recovered from the Mid-America Trucking Show.
I was just going to say that. We are fresh off the heels of a visit to the Mid-America Trucking Show in Louisville, Kentucky. And Jamie, you've been to a lot of them. You know that each one's a little bit different, but also a little bit in the same in that there are unique experiences, unique interactions at every show. And as we geared up for this one, you came to a realization that two people in particular were going to be there, and you had a light bulb moment.
I really did. Last year, in 2024, Dave Nemo announced his farewell tour, if you will. So we knew that there was going to be something very special happen at this Mid-America show, ending that one-year tour to a retirement. And for a lot of people who don't know, this is Landline's 50th anniversary. And the first editor of Landline Magazine was our now president of OOIDA, Todd Spencer. And I thought of two people who could tell some stories over 50 years plus in trucking media, trucking. I thought this was a grand opportunity and we couldn't miss out on it.
And we didn't.
No.
You put in a phone call. You called in a favor
to
Todd Spencer and Dave Nemo. We got them together, and essentially we just wanted to have a conversation and hear those stories that you talked about. And we started that conversation off by asking Todd specifically how he first became aware of Dave Nemo. And that's where we'll pick it up.
Well, I don't know if you'd call me I guess just a casual listener, because when I first became aware of Dave, I was in the Army, stationed at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and just listening to radio at night, and I suddenly I hear an ad for the Oak Grove truck stop. Well, hey, I'm from Oak Grove. I grew up less than a quarter of a mile from that truck stop, and here we have a radio station over 1,000 miles from home, and they're advertising the local business. And of course, it was Dave's show, overnight radio, trucker radio. And again, I'm in the Army, but you know, there's lots and lots of people listening to nighttime radio. And you know, later on, after I left the military, I got into a truck, and hey, it just kind of seemed all natural, because living in the Midwest, it was easy to listen to the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wide open spaces.
Absolutely.
You couldn't hear us in Kansas City or St. Louis, but you sure could hear us along I-70 between those places because of the power of the station. But you know, it's interesting that you were in the Army. I just got out of the Army when I went on with Charlie Douglas in '72. And so we have that in common.
Oh, yeah.
And with so many at that time, trucking has metamorphosized so much from the long haul, the Uncle Daddy phase of trucking, and everybody was on the road forever in 2 days. And then in the mid-'80s, things started to change when, my theory, I'm going to see what you think about this, Todd, when, you know, the baby changing tables in the men's rooms that you see?
Yeah.
Those started appearing in men's rooms mid-'80s, maybe late 84 to 86. And when that happened, coincidentally, I don't think so, trucking started to develop regional fleets at that time, because fathers, breadwinners, wanted to be more dads, wanted to be more home, and so fleets started really scrambling almost, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong here, because you're a lot,
right.
Almost scrambled to kind of develop these regional fleets so we can get these guys home more often, and that became a real mantra for the industry to this day. It's really interesting.
Yeah, well, and also that's kind of an evolution from the way trucking worked prior to deregulation, where so much of trucking was basically based on a hub and spoke system where you would just go out and come back. And then, you know, after deregulation, you could go anywhere, everywhere. And, you know, that was the niche that a lot of owner-operators fell into. Certainly myself was one, because I might go anywhere from West Coast to East Coast, Northeast, Florida.
Yeah, and the industry too, and I'll defer to you on all of these details here, but my phrase was the kitchen table companies, and what I meant by that is deregulation happens, guy gets a truck, his wife starts working on the business on the kitchen table. And they developed these family companies. Maybe he never got more than one truck. Maybe he developed into a small fleet. But that whole idea of family coming together to basically establish a trucking company on a kitchen table, literally.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, well,
Now it's done on a laptop or a smartphone.
you can own a truck and you can drive a truck, but if you're going to run a trucking business, then somebody better be paying attention to the business affairs. And of course, when you talk about the role that a spouse can play in this, in the early days, before any of this stuff changed, the regulatory requirements for a one-truck operator were identical to the regulatory requirements for a 1,000-truck operator. So you filled out quarterly reports for every state you ran in, all that crap, over and over and over. We had 3 or 4 license plates if you wanted to truck in very many states. All of that stuff came with a regulatory component, and it was more than one person could handle in a lot of instances. So having a support staff at home was really important.
Yeah, Justin Wilson had a great line for that, the great Cajun comedian. He's talking about this boy and girl riding down the road, with the old bench seat car, and he's got one arm around her and one arm on the wheel, half doing 2 jobs. And that's basically what happens if you tried to run it by yourself out of the truck. It was pretty much impossible, so you had to have that home base. And then when the kids got out of the house and grew up and left, a lot of times the wife would learn how to drive from him.
Yeah.
And the husband-wife team was just a staple for the industry for so many years until the 5 and 5 split sleeper berth.
Yeah,
all that goes away.
Yeah, the hours of service requirements really put a crimp in that.
Yeah, and we lost
stuff.
such a vital component to the industry, I think, because of that.
Oh, yeah, agreed completely.
So there's that.
So, Jamie, it's clear from hearing both of them speak that they have a shared history that dates back a long time, not just with trucking, but the way they kind of came into it and the way that they experienced it early on in those days. And it was a very different atmosphere back then in a lot of ways, right? That community, that sense of community really was kind of tied together by what Dave was doing on the radio in a lot of respects.
It really was. And I think, just how they kind of walked us through the evolution of trucking and routes and stuff and things like that. And then to realize that, radio was integral in tying it back together and giving them something. And so it was just natural to try and get them to explore that a little bit more and tell us what it was really like to basically connect with people over the airwaves and share that community space.
And I think that's kind of what we're going to hear coming up now, is how that kind of atmosphere, that community really came together around the radio, essentially.
It really is. Yeah, it's what I almost imagine, like when families would gather around the radio and,
the fire,
yeah, whatever. It almost felt like that, but then you realize that you're alone in a truck, and then there's this voice talking to you, and I think it's pretty profound what they have to say.
You mentioned earlier just the sheer amount of stories that these two men have between them, and we're about to hear a little bit of that too, about that sense of community and what it was like, some 50-odd years ago. Let's have a listen.
Well, I'll start this conversation, Todd, by saying this. I remember one night I got a call, it might have been 1980, and a guy says, it cost me $25 every time I stop to call you because I got to stop and pull into the rest area, see if the phone is there and if it's working, and then get online and hang on the phone for however long, just to call into the show. And that's that's what it was. Nobody knew what was coming down the line in terms of the industry. But one of the things, being veterans ourselves, my estimation of what was going on, like in, let's say, 1970, 1975, so many guys were coming out of Vietnam at that time, and they all had one thing, from my point of view. I'd love to hear your take on this too, Todd, but they all just wanted to be left alone. They didn't want somebody standing over their shoulder telling them what to do, how to do it, and when to do it, and that they did it wrong. And so trucking, for those who weren't already in trucking vis-a-vis, farm life, so many kids growing up in farms, 13 years old, you're running a combine or something, or driving a tractor trailer down to the railhead or whatever. So you had some heavy equipment experience as a kid of farms, and then of course you might have been M88 in the Army or something, you come out. But a lot of those guys got into trucking because it was long haul, all night driving, the road is yours, and you're independent. Even if you were a company driver, there was no way for them to get in touch with you, so you were independent. It would, the old captain of your ship out there was for real at that time.
Well, it was, and of course, obviously, trucking has always been attracted to those folks that, that are interested in a challenge. And of course, the mindset has got to be, well, look, I'm here and I need to be there, and I need to do whatever it takes to get from point A to point B.
Job one, regardless. Yes. And I haven't said this in a long time, but job one was getting the job done.
Yep.
And I think that's a steal from Ford or something. But now job one is being compliant. And if you can get the job done, good. But if not, compliance is the important thing. And then the whole controversy about, well, do you need to be compliant to be safe? Are compliance and safety the same thing? Yeah, they're the same thing, only different. Because you can be compliant and be as unsafe as the devil, out there on the road.
That's
and that mesh never really happened, did it?
Well, simply because the regulations book doesn't always match the real world that you work in, the circumstances that you face, the challenges and the responsibilities you have. When things go bad, folks don't want to hear about, well, you've got to comply with regulations. They just say, get my stuff here, would you?
Right. Yeah,
And truckers always do that and always have.
Yeah.
And they take pride in the responsibility of doing it safely. Mm-hmm. And, owner-operators especially are big on that stuff.
Sure, and safety wasn't this billboard, because people were safe. They wanted to be alive, and that's, you got to be safe. But we didn't push that safety thing because we didn't really have to. I don't think.
Well, see, what's sort of changed through the decades is that trucking is basically an essential utility for America.
Yeah.
It's essential. It's not, you got to have it. And so whatever, these folks that make it possible, you have to make accommodations so they can. So.
Yeah.
And because because that's what keeps our country going.
Yeah, and it's hard to square that circle when you got people in Washington writing rules and they don't know the difference between a truck and a tractor, or a tractor and a trailer. But there's that.
Well, the difference when FMCSA was created, it sort of got totally away from the concept or the reality, recognizing that everybody has to have trucks. Mm-hmm. So we have to create a system where they can function, where they can meet the needs. And you balance things. You look at economic situations and how economic interests are key to truckers being able to basically do what they have to do for the country. And we understand that, you can't have ultra, super low budget airplanes unless you want them to fall out of the sky. Yeah. We understand that, if you want transportation, it has to be an economically viable model. And we kind of moved away from that a little bit too much in trucking.
Yeah, I know, and it's. I don't think we've sorted that out yet, and now we have this new component. One of the things you mentioned a little bit earlier, kind of made me think about AI. can only learn from what it's already done. It can't foresee what's going to happen next like a human can. And I think that we're going to see a breakdown. I think we're going to see a resurgence in human control in trucks once people realize that computers can't do everything.
Sure.
They can learn something and do that, but they can't learn something and adjust and modify that like we can. And, you know.
Yeah, and I hope we don't learn those things the hard way, all of them anyway.
Yeah, is there any other way? Has there ever been any other way, though?
Hopefully we could see it coming just before we get to the cliff anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but when we started out talking about the way things were, you know, when you first started and I first started, you could call, you know, I'd hear folks call your show and we'd be talking about happy birthday. Somebody'd call in saying, wish so-and-so it's a happy birthday. And it was kind of like the radio audience would sort of like be one big extended family.
Yeah.
Where folks knew each other, you know, not intimately, but by name, by just simply shared experiences.
Yeah.
And it was pretty cool stuff.
Well, you know, when we kind of went down that path a little earlier, I said, well, you know, when all these guys coming out of Vietnam about 50 so years ago, they just wanted to be left alone. They wanted to be left alone by the guy with his hand on the shoulder, not by the other drivers.
Oh, yeah.
But trucking is one of the most social social worlds I've ever seen in my life, you know. And now we have, you know, all of the social media and everything.
Yeah.
And boy, listen, I remember going back to I think it was the late 80s when the Tough Book first came out, the portable computer. And I remember a top trucking executive said to me, well, you know, no truck driver's ever going to trade his lunchbox for a laptop computer. 2 weeks later, if you didn't have modems on the booths in your truck stop restaurant, you didn't have any business, you know. I mean, drivers latched onto that form of communication immediately and still do. And we have so many influencers now. In fact, Jimmy Mack and Lindsay just had on folks from Matt's here who are trucking influencers, and they're all very young people. They're all into that world. It's the next gen coming up, you know. But I think, given all of the bells and whistles of social media and electronic communications and everything, when you strip that away, the people, young and old, are still the same people they were back in the mid-'70s.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I must say trucking would be one of the professions back then that you could have friends all over the country.
Oh, yeah. And see them once a year in Louisville.
Yep. And good friendships. And you know, maybe people you've met, maybe people that you went to visit when you went in their area, but maybe not. But they were friends just the same. They were real friendships.
And they'll do anything for you, too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'm not so sure that, you know, we theoretically have lots of friends in social media, but most of them aren't really friends.
Yeah.
They're acquaintances or, you know, something, but they're not really friends in the way that most of us want to have friends.
Yeah, well, this is true.
Yeah.
But I think that's a blanket thing for the society too.
Oh, sure.
Because you know we and I'm guilty of this. You're probably guilty. We always think of trucking as being a separate entity in our culture, but we're not. We're in the culture. We're part of it, and we have the same concerns. Going back to the mid-'80s, you know, guys on the road wanted to be home more often. You know, that was unheard of when I got into trucking. When you got into nobody ever. When was the first time you ever heard of a driver say, "Man, I wish I could get home more"? The reason he was on the road many times was because he didn't want to be home, and that's another story too. But you know, that the old wildcatters and things like that. If you remember,
you know, there's two sides of that issue, and you know, I've been on both of them. I've always wanted the easy, predictable run where I'd get a lot of home time, and that stuff was there. Mm-hmm. It just didn't pay much.
And to a lot of guys, it was boring.
Well, yeah, and it can get like that. It all depends on what you're interested in. But if you wanted to make the better money, basically you needed to go where the better money was, and oftentimes that wasn't on that easy route.
That's for sure.
So the theme there, JB, I think, is community, which really ties in well with where the two men had this conversation, Matt's, which is really all about community. And the two of them, Dave and Todd, really lean into that when they come to Matt's and that idea.
Oh, 100%. And I think, again, they did so much reminiscing over, 5 decades of this, because the Mid-America Trucking Show started in 1973. OOIDA started in 1973. Dave Nemo was on the air in the early 70s. So, I mean, it was like they all kind of grew up together, if you will. And it was kind of fun to hear them talk about some of their standout experiences at the show when I've been going for roughly 20 some odd years, and I know that I have had those experiences. So knowing that it's changed, but it's really, they brought it back and connected it. And I think the message was very clear that even though it's changed, it's the same. So
that through line hasn't changed.
Exactly.
What it was then, what it is now, maybe a little bit different in terms of what it looks like and, events and whatnot, but that through line continues.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they've got a few things to say about that as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, this morning when we did the handoff with Tim Ridley earlier, we were talking about Matt's, and I said, hey, was that the year that you did the drag race with KC? Because all the guys dressed up in women's clothes and have the drag race. That kind of stuff, it still pervades, and the fun, the practical jokes, the camaraderie, it's all still there, you know. And the younger people are learning that too now.
Yeah, and, for the most part, this show is located in an area where that's fairly easy to get to for a big percentage of truckers, and it is kind of like an annual reunion.
Oh, it is, yeah.
Where folks come here to see folks that this is the only place you're going to see them.
How many drivers do you know that take their vacation to come to Matt's?
Oh, quite a few.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's,
And why would you do that?
Yeah.
Because you don't need to see another truck.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah, you just need to see those drivers and those friends, yeah. And the pork chop sandwich, of course.
Well, there's lots, there's always something, new things to see too. So it's a good deal.
So what I love when we get two people like Todd and Dave talking, and you can see it in the video, you can see the gears kind of turning and them thinking about what things were like back then. Mm-hmm. So you talk about Matt's, and then kind of something they keep coming back to here as well with the radio aspect of all of this is just how different things were back then. I think we are spoiled now in terms of like instant gratification. Anytime we want to hear something or call in, we've got a computer in our pocket that we can do that. And I think they had some fun reminiscing about just how difficult it was back then to actually do that, to communicate with other people.
Well, and I think the big segue for me was when they made the comment that we were not in the press room at the show. We were in the media room. And that evolution where, what was just radio, what was just one thing, how it all kind of changed. But then they really kind of hit home on the logistics. Yeah. And I thought that was really fascinating because we're very spoiled. And it's like you hear somebody on the radio and you don't agree with them, you can call right then. Yeah. That wasn't the case.
Yeah, the logistics not just of calling into a show, but the logistics of getting that show out from a place like Matt's was very, very different in the 1970s. Dave has lived through all of these experiences, and a testament to him, too, the staying power of someone like Dave Nemo, because it doesn't matter which medium he's talking through, it's the same, right? Because he's the same. He's all about connecting with those people. And it was really interesting to hear Dave talk about, again, like you said, the logistics of calling in, the logistics of getting a show out, but then also bringing it back to everything still being the same as well.
Yeah, that meant everything. I want to tell you something real quick here. Charlie Douglas founded the genre called trucking radio. March of '71. Coincidentally, the same month and year that Paul Young started this show, Matt's, March of 1971. So that was a beginning here for trucking media, if you want to, because now we're in the media room. We're not in the press room anymore. Which is kind of a tell, I think. And so we were there, but he told me that there's a long story about how I wound up working with Charlie on the road gang playing country when I came back out of the Army. But what he told me was, look, he says, you don't know anything about trucking? That's fine. He says, just be yourself. If you try to pretend you know something, if you try to be somebody you're not, these guys out there are going to spot you a mile away. He says, and this is 1972. They've been cheated, lied to, and shortchanged every day of their lives out there on the road, and they'll spot a phony a mile away, and you won't make it. Just be yourself. So my job, I figured, and I was told this, and I didn't believe it, but now I understand that my job was just being me, and I think that's the connection, because everybody is themselves out in those trucks. And if I'm myself in that radio studio, then we are on a common plane and we can relate.
A friendly voice in the middle of the night.
And a lot of people would call. In fact, it happened not too many years ago, but because as we get farther away, there are less and less people around who can say this. But I can't tell you how many guys have come up to me and said, my dad told me that he learned about my birth from you on the radio, and it's true. And then he's got kids, and now, next time I see him, he's got kids driving trucks, So it's this generational connection that we've had through 5 decades. And that means something, half a century, you too, man, over half a century in this industry. That's a chunk of history that deserves to be looked at. And we need to do that. That was then, this is now thing, so we can try to connect those dots, I think.
Changed a lot since then, and
And yet it hasn't.
Well, yeah. Everything is much more expensive. Everything is, I'm going to say, much more complicated or advanced.
Yeah.
But I can tell you the difference between driving the trucks of the 70s and driving the trucks that are available today. Oh, man, there is no comparison. This is pretty nice.
None whatsoever. The broadcasting look, when I started going to and Charlie did this before I did, but Charlie Douglas left the WWL in 1984, went up to WSM in the Grand Ole Opry. And I wound up getting the show. He had done all of the remote broadcasting, as we call them, and you'd set up at a truck stop. And we had 3 telephone lines, long-distance lines that we had to pay a month service and installation on. We had 1 line to get the program from the truck stop to the station, 1 line to get the program from the station to the truck stop so we could hear it, and then a talkback line so I could talk to the producer, John Parker in those days, say, okay, we're going to do the news now, and then I'm going to do some weather, and I'll get some drivers, so a little back and forth talk. So 3 long-distance phone lines, and I had a hand truck full of gear that I had to pay extra baggage for on the airplane. Now I can put it in a bag and carry it I can put it in a small satchel and put it anywhere and broadcast from a moving truck.
Yeah.
So the equipment has shrunk down to practically nothing, but the technology has exploded in terms of where we can be and what we can do. So, we don't even have to plug that stuff in anymore because we can use a phone charger and plug it in and just broadcast from anywhere. It's crazy.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. And who knows where we'll be 50 years from now.
Yeah, we'll just think. I think I hear it. Oh, yes, it's coming straight to my brain.
All right, so again, I think it's interesting to hear from people who have been doing this for a long time, who have watched everything change over the years. Mm-hmm. And again, Dave and Todd fit that bill almost to a T. And again, I think it's interesting to speak to where Dave has been and where he is now, how he's evolved over the years and adapted to all these changes. And you mentioned at the top, Dave is, I'm going to say, entering a new chapter in his life, because you had mentioned the word retirement.
I did.
And he had a reaction. He wanted to set the record straight, and we're going to hear that in a
His
second.
definition of retirement was a lot different than what a lot of people would define it as. And it was funny, and I felt like it was something that probably needed clarified, because this is somewhat the end of something, which I won't steal Dave's thunder. I'll let him explain what's going to happen. But we didn't throw Todd in there because he's retiring. It was just, the length of time and the evolution that Todd was responsible for. He took Landline Magazine from basically a newsletter format to what it is today. I'm only the third editor of that magazine. Yeah. And so I think it was just really profound to have that, but we had to let Dave clear the air over the retirement chatter.
And he did clear the air, and no spoilers, but if you're worried about not seeing Dave at future Matt's shows, don't worry, and I'll let him explain here.
There's a bit of confusion, but I'm going to circle back to what a truck driver told me years and years ago. He was from South Carolina. And he said, hey, I'm retiring, I'm getting off the road. Hey, man, it's been great. Hope you'll still listen, sometimes and things like that. And he calls about, I don't know, maybe almost a year later. But I remember the guy. He was in Phoenix, Arizona. But I knew he was. So I said, what are you out there, maybe going to the Grand Canyon or something? He says, no, I'm on a run. I said, wait, I thought you retired. He says, well, yeah. But I got home and I did everything I needed to do there. And my wife said, you know what? You just need to get out on the road every once in a while. Go do a run. So he did. And he was very happy. So I'm cutting to the chase. I'm retiring from the radio business. I'm not retiring from radio. So what I'm doing is I am doing the semi-retirement slowdown. So I'm going to go from 3 days a week to 2 days a week, but I'm going to be on more Wednesday through Sunday with Jimmy Mack and Lindsay. Just popping in here and there, doing some interviews and things like that. So I'm going to work less and be on the radio more. I've figured that out, and that's what's happening. So I'm not going away, and neither is he. We ain't letting you get away.
Yeah, well, yeah, you've always got to do stuff. You're going to do stuff. Just do stuff you like. So, and if you do some of this stuff for so long, it's just, it ain't like you're ever going to say goodbye, because it never leaves you.
Exactly. So I'm not even going to pretend to do that. Yeah.
Great conversation. Dave Nemo, Todd Spencer, we appreciate their time, obviously, in sharing all these stories with us and sharing their time with us. Jamie, you have a lot more experience with the both of them. And I'm curious your final thoughts about what you heard from all of them there.
I would have loved to let it go about 2 more hours. The stories that they were telling were so cool. I mean, I even grew up when payphones were still a thing, but I never really considered how hard that would be, staying on hold, feeding this thing nickels, dimes, quarters, whatever, just so you could stay on hold to possibly talk to Dave Nemo. I mean, that's some commitment right there, if anything. Yeah. And I just, I wish somewhere, if I had one thing I wish they would have done, but they're both too humble of men to have done it, is to really own their place in trucking media history and what they both mean to it. Not meant, mean. Because they have built a legacy that we carry on here because, we started a radio show. We have all these other things. We're now on video. This is still, the house that Todd built in a lot of ways. And the Dave Nemo show, Jimmy Mack's got it now, but it's still the house that Dave Nemo built. Yeah. And I think I want to pay them that due. And that's why I thought it was so cool to have the two of them talk. And again, they weren't going to own it and say it themselves, but I think it deserves to be said.
Yeah. The good news is we'll have another chance at future Matt shows to maybe get them to be less humble and maybe talk about some of these things, because as Dave talked about there, he's going to continue coming to these shows. He's going to continue to be on the radio. Todd, of course, is going to continue on as president of OOIDA as well. So we are fortunate that we've got many more years of them contributing to the industry, contributing to the community as well. So we'll look forward to that. Again, thanks to them for their time. For Jamie Jones, I'm Scott Thompson, and we'll see you next time right here on Landline Media.